basically, I unhinged you.
Yeah, you kind of did. It was your comment.
I'm okay with this.
It was your comment that I put at the beginning of that episode about me being too angry to be an atheist, and I realized you were right.
Welcome to the 42 Podcast, where a Christian and an atheist sit down to discuss the meanings of life, the universe, and everything else in between. Thank you for joining us.
In the last 2 weeks, something's happened to me, and I was reading Rachel Evans' book, Rachel Held Evans' book, and I realized while I was reading it that I was not angry anymore. And I was able to think, I guess, a little more clearly. And it's not like the questions are gone. I still have issues. I still have a lot of questions. But I guess I think I'm a little more willing to live with them now, maybe.
So, basically, I unhinged you.
Yeah, you kind of did. It was your comment.
I'm okay with this.
It was your comment that I put at the beginning of that episode about me being too angry to be an atheist, and I realized you were right.
If I may ask, what was the root of that anger? Do you know?
I think it's disappointment. Disappointment that my life hasn't been charged with purpose like I thought it would be. I feel like God passed me over.
Okay.
A little bit, as far as calling, I suppose, or...
Correct me if I'm wrong on this. And this is from the bits I've put together. But for you, you feel that there was supposed to be, and I'm going to use a term that you used with me, that there was supposed to be this sword in the stone, divine light shines down, and purpose is clearly cut and given, and that there's that transition from growing in faith to being super warrior in faith.
I just wanted a commission, I guess. I saw in the Bible it happens a lot. And I guess I just didn't know what I was supposed to do with my life. And I wanted direction. And I wanted to know God. And it never really happened. Or I felt like he wasn't there. Like he wasn't answering my prayers, like I was getting it wrong. Like I had a lot of energy and a lot of passion, but nowhere to put it. And that's kind of simplistic. It's not just that, but being disappointed by other people and people telling me that I'm this great, that I have this gift of evangelism, or I have, that I'm a warrior, and God's going to use me and stuff, and willing to be used, wanting to be used, begging God to use me, and looking for ways to be used, and it just always falling flat, or it was just always silent.
I want to get the exact quote so I get it correct. So that's why I'm a little divided on my attention. But I do hear you, and I want to read you a quote. And you'll probably be familiar with it. And it's not outside of the wheelhouse of things I've quoted before. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations. These are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors of everlasting splendor. This does not mean that we are to be perpetually solemn. We must play. But our merriment must be that kind, and it is, in fact, merriest of the kind, which exists between people who have, from the outset, taken each other seriously. Not flippancy, no superiority, no presumption. C.S. Lewis. I love the beginning of that quote. You have never talked to an ordinary person, a mere mortal. Because to me, it's this. The divine is not just in the magnificent, the big, and the glorious. The divine is, and maybe my perspective is because of my upbringing. Yeah, my father has had an extraordinary career. He's made a name for himself in his field, in his work. But the hero of my family, and I think my father will agree with this, the hero of my family is not him. It's my mother. The last time she had a job was like 1984, roughly. And it was working one of those old style switch elevators that you have to have the lever and line the floor up. That was her last job. She has spent decades of her life raising 4 children. And now that all of the children have effectively moved out, she's spending the next decade of her life pouring into 4 grandchildren. And she's the hero of our family. No minor thing, from a meal to a Band-Aid to just loving her children, has ever... It is the act of heroism in my family, the love that my mother has shown. So my perspective in that is maybe a little reversed because of that. Seeing that from what she has done, from what my own wife does, to the values that instilled and brought into my family. So I look at things like a calling, and that calling can be something as simple as being a mother who loves their child, to something as complex as being the next great evangelist.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no mere ordinary person. That next great evangelist had to have one single moment where someone loved them enough that they were able to then go out and show that love.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. In a way, I don't know where I went wrong. Because I know I believe that. Isn't it about affecting one person at a time? It's not about your college. It's not about being in a capital M ministry. It's about being in communion with God.
Can I offer a perspective again?
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure you went wrong.
I want the perspective to be like, this was part of the journey and necessary.
So, I think it is. If I may postulate, it was like December of 2019, November 2019, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
You and I had a conversation because of something you posted on Facebook. And it was one of those, I could see there was a shift happening in you and how you thought about faith, your upbringing, your belief. And I interacted and reached out, and you and I had a little bit of a conversation for a couple days there, and things just kind of fell silent for a bit. And it happened a couple times throughout early 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But that first post in 2019, I sat down and I wrote what was my first attempt at considering podcasting and a podcast episode. And it was the title of it was called The Nature of a Question. Because you were questioning things. You had this deep-rooted desire for an answer that you needed.
Mm-hmm.
And out of our conversation, I wrote this thing. I still have it somewhere in my files. I'll dig it up someday and share it with you. And it was addressing that. But that was a seed moment that started and took, I think it was in September when I reached out to you again, and I said, look, I've been playing with this idea. I think you're the missing piece in it.
Mm-hmm.
And out of that, here we are. Here's what you and I have been doing called the 42 podcast. And I think it's fair for us to look and say that even entering into the podcast with that, it allows for questions. Because you're not the only one that's questioning.
Mm-hmm.
You're not the only one that's been hurt by the church. And, I look at the Catholic diocese where I'm at, and they just declared bankruptcy. They're closing schools or closing parishes because of how they hurt kids 20, 30, 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they're continuing that pain indirectly and instilling huge negative questions in a whole generation to come. And so I look at where you've been, and I don't see this as a, oh no, you screwed it up, you're gone. I see it as this is a part of that journey. You know, the brick wall has come down. Now you're floating down the river. Going back to my river references, you know, you're seeing some of those solid points, but redefining some other things and seeing a bigger perspective.
Yeah, I don't want to presume anything anymore. I want to take it slow and figure out. I'm not really sure exactly where I'm at, but I know I miss Jesus. There are things I want to have an answer for, and but is it possible for me to love Jesus and go after him and still have those questions?
Oh, yeah. One of the things I say to my students all the time, and will say as a pastor someday, as whatever God puts me in next, is simply this: ask a question. If I know the answer to it, I'll give it. If I don't, we can seek it together. And if we never find it, God will fill it in at the end. The flip side to all of that, the second side to that statement that I don't always say, is I also know that I've probably gotten some answers wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, in that end, I'll get the correction to it, oh, whoops.
Right.
But I look at it and go, it's a journey of questions. It's a journey of finding answers, and sometimes we think we have an answer, and then, no, that doesn't exactly fit.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't exactly grow up going back to conversations you and I have had with creation and evolution, I didn't grow up in a church that espoused the ideas of a kind of relaxed view on creation. They taught the easiest answer, which was 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you look at it in a bigger picture, science is involved, and that can get messy. So they just did the Sunday school answer. And that was kind of a beginning of questioning for me, and it wasn't heresy to question it. My youth director then enabled that question, enabled that exploration, and didn't diminish the question, but encouraged it. And that's kind of part of where I've gone with it, of the question isn't wrong. Again, it's the journey of the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to dive into some of the specific questions? Do you want to?
Yeah, let's do that.
You sent? Okay. My email's opening back up. Or do you have them in front of you?
I do have them in front of me too.
Great. Do you want to just ask and I'll respond, or?
Yes. This is the one that's sort of been on my mind the last day or two, but here it is. I can listen to music that is not worship, and it moves me. It makes me feel things. It makes me excited. It makes me feel full somehow. Therefore, just because worship music makes me feel something, that doesn't necessarily mean it's God. Does it? How do you tell the difference? That was the strongest spot for me in Christianity, was worship, but I don't trust it anymore. How do I know what is true?
So, I guess I'm going to preface this answer with this statement. Worship pastors may disagree with me on this, may even want to fight me on this, but I think the answer is we have the equation wrong for how we do worship and music. I really do. So, when you and I were in a young adult program,
Mm-hmm.
what was your impression of every morning? Do you remember how we started every morning back then?
Yeah, worship, we started in the morning.
How long?
An hour.
Doing what?
We were singing songs, and I guess it's up to you, but you prayed and talked to God and stuff like that. I think the impression is you were going to get something.
So I don't know if you'll remember this, because there's a differing on perspectives, if you will. How did you interact with that worship moment?
I loved it. And
did you bounce around? Did you sing? Did you physically interact with
Yeah.
with the
I was
moment?
very kinesthetic because my spiritual life has always been confusing, but I know how to move. I know how to give. Oh, I tried to give God my energy, and like it was easier to picture giving myself to God in a physical way than in a sort of abstract way. So I enjoyed worship for that reason. Like it was physically doing something, which felt better than being confused.
But to a degree, is it fair to maybe, years later, supply that you covered your confusion through movement, through action,
Oh
through...
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what was real then.
Okay, so for you, you covered the questions of worship, of your spiritual health, in movement, in interaction, in creating a show of worship.
Well, I don't know. Is there something to be shown? Yes. Can I know what somebody else is experiencing or doing? No. So, I guess I don't know. Did I mean what I said? I tried to. I tried to mean what I was saying.
You tried to mean what you were saying, but you still had the questions, you still had struggles, and so your acts of worship, you tried to supply as something, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you tried to supply it as a means to smooth out that struggle.
I guess so.
Do you remember how I interacted with those mornings of worship?
Yeah, you didn't move much.
I sat there. And I got lectured on that a handful of times. Because why wasn't I worshiping like everyone else? And this isn't how I worship. This isn't even a thing of... I don't sit in the same stance of worship as many others. I do understand that. I have my way of worship that is private, is quiet. Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God. That's where I enter into things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not to say that I haven't had worship experiences that are filled with dancing, filled with just exuberant joy. I've had those moments, but those moments are more peaks and mountaintop experiences in worship than they are a constant. So, again, that's where I enter into it differently. And this is where I think we as the collective church maybe have the equation wrong, because what we're trying to do is bring this high energy mountaintop experience, whether it's a constant daily basis as an act of worship, or a Sunday or a Wednesday service act of worship, when what we should be doing and encouraging is acts of worship within music that are expressive of the experience of the congregation. When you look at the Psalms were meant to be played, were meant to be marks and pillars of the nation of Israel, of David, of the psalmists, and what God was doing. They were expressive of those mountaintops and those valleys. And we've lost that in our worship. We have mountaintops, and we just try to go mountaintop to mountaintop, skip the valley.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And it's easier to do the mountaintop and perform a show.
Right, but what if you're by yourself in the car? Same thing. What if you're in your shower? Same thing. I hear what you're saying, because I agree. If you're at a church and it looks like a concert and everybody's emotional, well, everybody's emotional because it looks like a concert. Concerts make you excited. So what percent of that is God meeting somebody there? Oh yeah, probably, right? But how do you know what
Right. And I think that's where we are wrong in the acts of collective worship of, okay, what is the season that we are in as a congregation, as a church? And this is part of the reason I do love the church structure I'm in and that I work with right now, because we are in week 2 of Lent. And I really have come to love the season of Lent in the church, because we change what we do. We don't go, yay, happiness. We're in a somber state. We're still having worship, but that worship is kind of walking through a valley of the season. And we try to reflect that in our church seasons where I'm at. And I think that's more beneficial and healthy for individuals and congregations, is to look at, because we can pump loud music. We can pump music that will energize and get people moving. But in the end, is that the healthiest result for individuals and a collective congregation?
Right. Something is, so what you're saying is, like, we are the body of Christ, and when we're in a church building with other Christians, we should be functioning as the body of Christ, as sort of one, united somehow. So it shouldn't be the same all the time.
I'm going to use an example that I in my second year and my wife's second year of that adult program, her father passed away.
That's right, yeah.
Right at the beginning of that year. And she spent the first couple months just, how do you worship with that deep a wound? Because, I mean, that's a game changer for anyone. And we don't do even that well, where it's, okay, let's have corporate worship, and someone in the back is bleeding out emotionally.
That's true. That's true. And actually, biblically, there is a lot to be said for the laments. Look at Jeremiah. Look in the Psalms, too. There's plenty of laments, and I agree with you that is totally lacking in the church.
And this is why I look and say I think we have the equation of worship wrong, collectively. Because when we do it as show, when we do it as energy, when we want to hype people, we want to get them moving, then all we're doing is playing on the depth of emotional interaction with music. We're playing and using those strings
right,
to manipulate a situation of, yeah, you'll feel better, but is it truly feeling better because you've had a legitimate interaction, or because we played really hoppin' music today?
Yeah, I agree with that.
So your question is valid. I just think that it's, again, this is why I divide in my head that there's the earthly church and the heavenly church. And the earthly church has a lot of flaws, has a lot of holes, but we're trying to make things work. And worship can be one of the easiest ones that starts sinking a church, because we either create a show that plays on the emotional interactions of an individual in music, or we create legitimate journeys. That's where I fall into it, where, I mean, that really is kind of you looking collectively of, where am I? And what am I going through?
You looking collectively. What do you mean?
Yeah, so collectively being the ties that you have, your family. Where are you at with your family? You know, are you in a good place or are you in a bad place? Are there wounds in your family that are hindering your aspects of worship, or even are there wounds between you and the collective congregation or the community that are then hindering that? Are you in a good spot with, or it's a spider web of connection tied into us, community, and congregation, if that makes sense.
It sounds kind of complicated, but yeah. When you're worshiping, or when you're in church and there is singing happening, that's what you're thinking about, and trying to go through and see if there's something wrong in your connections.
For some people, yeah. I mean, that's part of it. Here I have to admit, for me, a Sunday morning,
you're a little busy.
I'm thinking about what comes next.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking about, well, what do I need to support Sunday schools? What am I doing later today for youth group? What am I doing in 5 minutes to continue the corporate worship for the church? And I play a small role in this, so I don't even know, I know when I've been in the big chair and I've preached, my head is in 1,000 different places. So again, that's kind of where I look and go, my interaction with worship is different, because I can't always get my head out of this and be in the moment.
So for you, where is worship for you the sweetest? Where is real worship happening? And it has nothing to do with music. It has nothing to do with any of that. Like, for you, where is worship the sweetest?
So you say this, and I just had a moment of this week too, which is why I'm reacting. Monday I was running a kind of a load of stress on a handful of different things that I have going on in my life, and it was time to get my daughter to horse lessons. She's been learning to ride, and Monday we had like 3 inches of snow in 2 hours, so it was getting the driveway cleared, it was getting the car ready, it was getting to and from. It was a gamut of stress, and then we get to the horse lesson, and my daughter's barn where she rides is sitting up this steep bank of a hill, and my wife's car is broke down right now, and that's the one that's the SUV and has the all-wheel drive, so I'm driving my little 2-wheel stick, and I get the speed I can to go up the hill. I get so far, and then I'm sliding back down the hill. So I'm parked in a weird spot. It's just kind of the accumulation of stresses to this day. And I go from getting Ad to the barn to walking down to the ring and waiting for her, the instructor, the horse, to come and ride. And as I'm standing there in fresh snow with the cold, and it started like sleeting a little while I was out there, there was a moment of just pure silence. I could hear, it was like a half mile away, there was another farm, and I could hear the goats bleating. Was how quiet it got. And in that moment of silence, it was a pause, and I look up, and the clouds are breaking, and I can see the moon. And it was just this perfectly quiet snow evening at the end of a stressful, long, weird day that was a pause for me. That was an action of worship.
Selah.
Without music, without anything. And it was just a small moment of grace where I smiled and I had peace. I was still stressed because my car is stuck at the bottom of the hill. I had to figure that out at the end of the lesson. But there was a peace that surpassed anything I felt from that day, anything I've had this week. And so when I sit with that, it's little actions of worship like that. I can't explain them. When they hit me, I'm just kind of stunned and flabbergasted and can only engage in the peace of the moment. Those are the big overarching ones. Now there are other moments of interactions with music that are worship. There are other ones that are interactions with scripture or the word, or scripture and word, that's the same thing, but scripture and study that are worship. So worship is different, and I still have aspects of corporate worship in my life, but they take different reflections at different moments because of what I do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does, because Sunday is not the Sabbath for you.
No, Sunday is my Monday.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that. Interesting. So, I don't know how to proceed for myself, but I get what you're saying.
And that's something that you have to explore, because it is incredibly personal, and it is entirely corporate all at once.
Right.
Because my actions of worship then depend on how my family engages. Because if I'm in a bad spot, that can affect them. If they're in a bad spot.
If you have a baby, maybe you won't get any worship in. Your worship is at 4 a.m.
Yeah, actually, surprisingly, yeah. Because we bottle fed both kids. There were moments where I'm just sitting there going, I want to sleep. Oh, wait. Peace that transcends.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
So yeah, I mean, it is very different. It is very unique for every individual. And worship, do not misunderstand. I do value the corporate worship, the corporate using of songs and hymns to gather and build collectively as a community, as a congregation. But I think we need to not just have this focus on music. It needs to be looking at the whole of an individual.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, again, going back to those young adult years, there were times that I just disappeared on our day off into the woods.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gone. I'm happy in the woods. Bye.
Yeah.
And that's part of it, knowing what you need.
I always feel like when I'm praying or talking to God that he's impatient. If he knows all my thoughts, he knows what I'm thinking, and he knows whether like my thoughts are true. Like, you know how we can lie to ourselves and think something even though it's not true? That information messes me up when I'm praying, because I'm like, this is what I think, this is what I want, or this is what I think my motives are like. But I know he knows, and so I don't know how to pray. I don't know how to talk to God when he knows everything. Like, God, I know you know how I feel about this, but this is how I think I feel about this. I just, it's like a trippy.
It's a loop.
Yeah, I don't like that.
And maybe the better way to think of that is to actually remove God from the omnipresent, all-knowing God. Not saying he isn't, but in your mind to remove that aspect of him.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, what's a comfortable setting that you would go and do with a friend?
Coffee shop or my living room or something.
Sit down. Have a moment of going to a coffee shop with God. And in removing that omnipresent aspect, just allow him to hear you. To game out your thoughts. To speak. Because what he wants isn't for you to come into this prayer perfectly and knowing that he already knows all, but to come into this and go, hey, here's where I'm at. And just communicate with him, because he wants to know, but not know because he's already there and seeing all of it, but know because we've invited him into our life in a way that is talking with him about it, that's interacting with him through it. Two of the times that I do this the most is when I'm driving, where I'll have the radio off, I'll have the podcast and audiobooks, all that off, and the car will just be quiet, and I'll start talking.
Mm-hmm.
Just, hey, here's where I'm at. Here's what's going on. I don't even know which end is up on this, and here's every raw bit of emotion I have, good, bad, or indifferent. The other time I do it, it's kind of an escalation, if you will, is especially when it gets like that nice kind of fall or spring, warm but cool, is I'll have a fire in the backyard, and I'll sit back there with a cigar, and nobody wants to sit around me when I have a cigar, so I'm in the backyard by myself, and I just talk. I talk through what's going on, and I catch him up. And I know he knows. I know he can see all, transcends all. I know he knows all. But I want him to know from me. Mm-hmm. I want him to be able to hear me say it so that I can hear him respond to it. And it's just that conversation aspect of, yes, he knows all, but he wants to know it from us. Mm-hmm. Because for him to interact with it just as I know all, Lindsey, and you are going to do, that's a cold God. That's a God who isn't interested in us. That's just one who's setting up the whole pins and knocking them down, and away they go in his order and expectation. But his desire isn't to set us up as a pin that just goes. It's to set us up as someone who will interact with him.
Right.
And that's my perspective. That's my action of engaging in that conversation. Which, again, I know it's not entirely fulfilling, but that's a piece of what you have to find out for yourself.
Right. Hold on a second. I'm going back to my Gmail. So, can I ask one more?
You can ask as many more as you have.
All right. I have gathered from a lot of sources an idea of what God is like. How do I know if the God I have pictured, like the God that when I pray or I'm quiet and I'm sort of trying to lean in, how do I know that God is God as he really is? Or something that I've built? Like how I said, I kind of feel like he's being impatient. Like that's a characteristic of God that I've given him, but maybe not one that he really has. You know what I mean?
This is the question I have struggled to answer. I've had these questions since, what, Monday or Tuesday?
Mm-hmm.
And I've struggled to answer this one in any way that is tangible, because it's going to be an odd way to answer it, but it's the best I can come up with of, I don't know what God is. I don't know perfectly what personality traits to apply to him, but I think that's part of the relational aspect and desire that he wants and desires from us, in that sitting and talking with him, because then he reveals. And so there are moments where, looking at scripture, there are moments when God is angry, and just going in Old Testament, in Exodus, there are moments where God is angry and I'm going to wipe out these Israelites. I'm just going to be done with them. I can raise new people out of the stones. And he's having this conversation with Moses. And Moses is going, wait a minute. If you do this, what are the Egyptians going to say? And
Mm-hmm.
you have other times where Moses comes back up onto the mountain. He's like, dude, just get rid of them. Wipe them out. And then God's going, no, look, I'm doing something. And I guess that's kind of where it comes back to me for that, of when we reveal ourselves to him, at our best, at our worst, he reveals himself to us. And it's not the same. It's never the same, but that's even the nature of relationships. Where when you and I did the second episode of the faith discussion,
Mm-hmm.
I was not on my best game that day, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I was off. But I have to admit that in that I kind of try to cover things like that. I try to be a consistent. But I kept stumbling in that conversation with you. I kept struggling with it because part of me was reserved, was held back, because we were going through some things here, and it was early in the morning. I was definitely not awake. So it's pieces like that of, he just walks with us wherever we are, and his nature is revealed as we reveal ourselves to him. And me sharing that I was not in that best on that day it's vulnerable, because I'm not happy about it, but it's that desire that I have in the relationship that you and I share, of there are aspects of vulnerability between us that reveal deeper pieces of who we each are. And in podcasting, I'm not always comfortable revealing those sides just yet, but that's even a growing thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I feel like I'm starting to rabbit trail, so I'm going to shut up.
I think I know it. It's like you felt not at your best, but that's kind of where God met you anyways. That's kind of where God met you. That's kind of where God met up. Me.
All of us.
Yeah.
And it's, okay, it's not our best, but then when we start allowing him in to not our best, he starts revealing more of him. He starts revealing more aspects of grace that I can't even begin to apply the depths of grace that he keeps revealing in my life and others' lives around me. And okay. There's a sweet little old lady. I cannot remember her name. But this is a long, long time ago, before the young adult program. I was going to college at South Carolina. I was in a weird place and time in my life with what was going through my head. And one of it was there was a lot of anger in my life and in my head. And this sweet little old lady came up to me one day and said, you need to let God into that anger. You need to, in her southern way, said, go curse God out. And it wasn't curse God and die, but it was, you need to let him into that anger. Not hide it from him, not try to be perfect in front of him, but even in anger, even in grief, even in joy, don't let God just have the best of us. Let God have every aspect of us. Because as we do that, again, that nature of God is revealed and we grow, we move, we interact.
Yeah, if God is a dynamic being, then it should be possible to have a give and take where he's, I don't know, giving. I mean, like, where we're receiving something as we give something too.
Well, in New Testament, the Gospels, Jesus says, call him Abba, Father. And the desire and the relationship is that goal. He is Father. Not God held at a distance, but God amongst his people, God with us. Which is, I think that's Emmanuel.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
God with us is the goal, is the desire. And that's why, that question threw me, because he is everything and he is nothing with what we allow him to have in our lives, in our spirit, in our emotions.
He is everything and he is nothing with what we allow him to have. Interesting. And compelling.
I hope that makes sense.
Well, it goes back to that, you reap what you sow. If you're giving nothing, you're going to get nothing. But maybe if we're giving God, I don't know, giving him the opportunity, showing up and making yourself available.
Well, and so one of the things that you have harked on is the idea of sacrifice. God, I have sacrificed X, Y, and Z. Where are you? Why haven't you done the resultant of my sacrifice? I don't think we live in that kind of age anymore. That is the sacrifice, the idea that I have done. Trying to think how to phrase this. We do not live in an age of sacrifice that is from the Old Testament. That is the sacrifice of something has to die or something has to be given up to gain access to God. The sacrifice he wants now is for us to enter into a relationship with him in a real manner.
Okay, yeah.
I want to quote it, and I want to quote it correctly because I just got like 5 different translations that ran through my head, so I'm going to read it directly so I don't screw it up. And I'm going to read it from a new translation I've never read it in before.
Oh.
So this is...
You're taking a risk.
a slight one. I don't feel like it's overly risky, but it's a little risky. Therefore, I exhort you, brothers and sisters, by mercies of God, to present your bodies as a sacrifice, alive and holy and pleasing to God, which is your reasonable service. Do not be conformed to this present world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may test and approve what is the will of God, what is good and pleasing and perfect. Oh, and here we go. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone of you, not to think more highly of yourself than you ought to think, but to think with sober discernment, as God has distributed to each of you a measure of faith. For just as in one body we have many members, and not all the members serve the same function, so we who are many are one body in Christ, and individually we are members who belong to one another. Romans 12:1. I read 1 to 5. It's not just sacrifice my body, okay, I will cut off my left arm and God will grow me a cooler one. But it's the mind, it's the body, it's the interactions with God that are the renewal, that are the life spring. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What's in your head?
I can't help but make it transactional. I want to hear his voice. If I want to hear his voice, I have to talk to him. If I want to hear his voice, I have to read the Bible. If I want to hear his voice, I have to go to church. I have to really mean it. Or, I don't know. Am I doing enough to hear his voice? To hear him speak to me?
I think with where you're at, if I may speak directly and plainly, without any reservation, what you need to do is just start small. And don't expect sword in the stone divine moment. Expect small piece. I would also encourage you not to touch the Old Testament for at least 6 months.
You know what occurred to me, actually, the other day? I don't know, yesterday? But I've been asking God for a long time, for years and years and years, what's my function? What's my function in the church? What am I supposed to be doing? What's my calling? But it sort of occurred to me that, like, your calling isn't something that you graduate life and do. It's something that you're already doing. And I tend to be a troublemaker. So I don't know. I don't know exactly what that means. But I go into places and I say, this is wrong. Or this isn't efficient. Or this isn't real. What's going on? And I see weaknesses in things. So is that bad? Like is that a bad thing? It can be double-edged, I suppose.
Oh, most definitely. But if I may offer, and it's a little wordplay, but I think it's also reflective of your heart and maybe even where God is moving you, where he's edging you as an individual, as a person, is in the name you chose for your podcast when you were running it.
Mm-hmm.
What was that name?
The Defector.
I don't think you're defecting from faith. I don't think you're defecting from God. I think what you are defecting from are the failures of the world, from society, from community, and from those things that have snuck into the church.
Yeah.
And I think that's, for the past, it's been a little over a year for you, but for that time period, that's what you have been fighting against.
Yeah.
Directly and indirectly, trying to find a solution that was better.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But I think where you're at, where you are truly and honestly at, is the Titanic sinking. And you're trying to say it is. You're trying to say that we've got holes on the side and we're going down. There's biblical truth in that, where I believe the church must fail for the end to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I also believe that God is most definitely working and will always have true ministry here. True ministry on this world. Because he loves us. And he's going to keep that going until the day that we fully reject him and that final piece of hope comes into play.
Yeah.
So I think you are a defector. I really do. I just don't see you as having ever defected from the faith. I see you having defected from the failures of the collective church.
Yeah, I think I buy that.
It's okay. I call myself the bad theologian.
We're a pair.
The bad theologian and the defector. If I may offer one last piece from the email you sent me, I think you need to have a conversation with your family, with where you're at, and what the next move forward is for you guys in your acts of worship. Do you stay with the church that you're at now? Or do you maybe start a time period of church shopping?
Yeah.
Now, the hard part in all of this is no matter where you go, there will always be broken aspects of people in the church, from the leadership to the congregation. And all we can do, whether you're in ministry or in the congregation, all we can do is work to bring grace, bring Christ's love, and preach truth in a loving way.
Yeah, I like that. I have a bad feeling though that I can't go anywhere. I suspect I'm stuck right where I am, and I'm gonna have to go back there.
Maybe in going back there, there's a sit-down conversation that you need to have with the pastor and say, look, I think it's fair to say I went off the rails a bit here for a while, but I needed to.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to understand who I was, what my faith is, and if this is worth believing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have a powerful testimony. I think I say this without being able to verify it fully. Only you can. Okay? I think you have only begun to be broken apart as salt and spread. I think you have only begun to draw out the best parts of church and ministry, and I don't know what that looks like long run. I don't know how that plays out for you, but I think that's where we're at in the relationship you and I have with the podcast. I think that's where you and I are at in what the podcast will do. I think that's where you're at in what's going to happen with you, your family, and your church if this is the route you pursue.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be something as simple as you spend the next 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 decades of your life loving your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Or you spend the next however many decades being the next evangelist. Great evangelist. I don't know. But I don't think you're an ordinary person. I don't think I am either. And I don't think any of our listeners are, but I think we've started. I think there's a beginning in this.
I think that's exactly what I want to see. Is I want to go back to that church, and I want to be extraordinary, but I want that person who I know is talking about me to be extraordinary too. You know?
And that's hard. It really is hard. And, the flip side to this is, if I'm being entirely honest with you,
Mm-hmm.
we are 6 to 9 months ahead of where I thought we would be.
Cool. So you thought I was going to get converted 6 months from now? Yeah.
6 to 9.
No.
I gave myself some room to work. Yeesh. Yeah, I thought I was going to have to read more of Dawkins and, what's the other guy? Yeah.
But see, that's the thing here, is that I know logically being an atheist makes perfect sense. Logically, the science behind evolution makes perfect sense. Despite that, that's not what I feel and believe to be true. I mean, the science is different. I think that's like a different thing. But something is happening despite. I spent a year reading this stuff. I spent a year reading it and loving it. Loving every minute of it.
And this is simply put, where I think that falls short, is science is great. Science enlightens, explains, and educates, but science misses a divine spark.
Science can't answer the why.
And it's that kind of festering sore spot that will be there. And maybe someday there will be this grand revelation of some of the pieces that are missing, but I still think there's still that divine spark that's always going to be missing.
I feel like I need to tell God, all right, Lord, if you're a genocidal maniac, let me know right now. I need to know right now if you're that crazy. I need to know. Let's get this out of the way, because I don't see that. I don't think it's ever going to be put to bed. I don't think it ever will be.
But sitting with the question isn't bad. It's not. And, there's no question that is truly dangerous. I really don't think there's a question that is truly dangerous if we sit down and answer them. If we make them taboo and never talk about them, that's when we get dangerous.
Yep.
But I think this is just a beginning for you. I'm speculating. I'm guessing. I'm answering that from perspectives and what I see. But, it comes down to this. If it's only one person that is listening to us and that this affects, that this changes, that this helps, then it's worth it. If it's thousands, millions, it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the second I will reference this, but it's, the movie The Core, the French guy.
Mm-hmm.
When the one guy is melting down, I can't save 6 billion people, and the French guy goes, I'm not here to save 6 million or billion. I'm here to save 4. I'm here to save my family, and that's what it is for me.
Mm-hmm.
I may never save more than 1 or 2 souls my entire life, but if I've done that, and that's what God had for me, I'm fine with it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here for whoever, whatever, and however, and just...
Yeah. Yep. I like that. Bottom up Christianity.
I think you go any other way, you start getting it wrong.
Yep, I agree.
I'm just going to finish with this. Whatever comes next, it's not going to be easy, but I think it's going to be worth it. Anything in life that's not easy is not always worth it.
Mm-hmm. It's the hard that makes it great.
Yeah. I'm proud of you, Lindsay.
I'm annoyed with you, Rob.
Okay, so we're right there. We're right... Normal life.
As per usual. I appreciate this impromptu conversation and your availability, and thank you.
This is the stuff I love doing. It really is. Whether it's you or my students or congregation members, this is the stuff I love. All right.
See you later.
Have a good day.
You too.
Yeah.